John Andrews, it is so much fun to have you here today on the Original Hustle. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, Gina. Thanks for having me and looking forward to our discussion today.
I am too, because it definitely takes your side hustle and my favorite beverage and leads us to a conversation. So to me, it's the perfect way to set up what we really want to talk about. And just a little bit about us that I
Mhm.
was thinking about slightly before we joined to record here. And that was that we met probably close to a decade ago, give or take.
Mhm.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
in the time, I think you were originally introduced to me through Thomas Bean, our CMO. He knew I was planning a lot of events for influencers and dinners, really, and he said that you had a passion for, wine and champagne and, I should connect with you because you probably have some great recommendations, and boy, he was right. You certainly did, and I think that led us on the path of hosting even bigger events with our executive team and influencers and really all that consider themselves wine aficionados. So you impressed the herd,
Mhm.
and I certainly have become addicted to having you as my wine ninja over the years and being able to, get the recommendations not only for the best flavors but also best price point or those hidden hooks and things that most of us don't know about if we're not in your world. So I'd love to start by hearing that moment you knew you wanted to become a sommelier.
Yeah. It's not really, I would call it traditional path. Like many of my colleagues in the wine industry or people that I know, it was a bottle of wine that they had that said, they had this aha moment. For me, it was really the business of wine that kind of attracted me to it. So, um, you know, hate to admit this, but over 20 years ago, it's when I moved to California. And whenever friends when they came to visit, one of the first things they wanted to do was go wine tasting. And so, I started doing research on where's good places to go, go to Napa, go to Sonoma, and just, had this, decide to take people to various places. And I did a lot of research. And it was then I started to um, really be fascinated how different products could be from different places and different producers using essentially the same ingredients. And so it started fascinating me, and I got to know more people in the wine industry. And eventually, I just started. I wanted to find out more because the story I always tell people when you if you go into a strip mall and you see three dry cleaners there, two of them are going to fail because you can't have two businesses or three businesses doing the exact same thing without any differentiation and survive. So when you drive down, Highway 12 in Sonoma or Highway 29 in Napa, you see tons of wineries right next door to each other. And my business brain went, this shouldn't work. But then going and tasting all over the place, you realize it can because it's about how you address individual tastes. And so I got fascinated. I ended up working at a small winery part time on weekends. Started to learn more about the industry from not only how the wine is made, but what people enjoy, and it it led me into what I call what a term everybody's familiar with, imposter syndrome. I was behind the bar pouring wine for people, but I had no formal education in this, and that led
Right.
me into, well, maybe I should do formal education. I did the quartermaster sommeliers, did courses there. I did wine and spirits education trust, and that kind of, it was around the time when you and I got to know each other. Um, and that's how Thomas and knew what I was doing because I would host little things for him, and being able to recommend French wine to a French person and have them be happy um, is an
Amazing.
indication of you're doing something right.
That's awesome, and it's so true. I didn't realize that's how you kind of caught his attention, but it makes sense, and at some point, I'll have to do a follow-up with Thomas, not only about this, but about his French champagne stories, because he's got a few that are pretty funny as well, and I think that, you know, the other thing I really remember was during the pandemic. I recall that as being a moment where you were really studying and working towards getting this, and even a lifestyle change, right? Like you were gonna
Mhm.
make this side hustle more of a and passion project more of a reality, and, I think in many ways, it was kind of the perfect time to do that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, before I jump into that, when you talk to Thomas, remind his favorite wine is called Condrieu. It's from the northern Rhone Valley. But um, yeah, so during the pandemic, yeah, it actually started just before that. So um, I decided to focus my formal training in the Wine and Spirits Education Trust, or as it's commonly known, WSET. Um, level one is just for wine. It's for anybody, right? It's about if you like wine and want to understand a little bit more, it's an introduction for everybody into wine. Level two is a little more wine industry oriented. Level three is takes that to an exponential level. And then level four, which is the diploma program, is for people that are serious geeks about wine. I started the diploma program just before COVID started, and I was in home all the time. I had opportunity to study. The program itself was going through a bit of a change and was forced to go through a change. So they had to be, they had to send us wine to taste, and it was a whole new experience. What these programs do is expose you to wines and producers from regions um, most people wouldn't even think of, like getting dry Hungarian wines or Georgian wines, or even these obscure varietals from Greece. It's fascinating. It just took me to that next level, and it was always about just going that little bit deeper, finding out why things are done the way they are, not just how, but why. The why is important.
That's really cool. I hadn't realized all of that either, and so, something new to learn each and every time we talk. Like, I always find that there's some new sort of avenue to go down, and, you know, I think as you were just sort of saying, right, it sort of leads me to my next question, which is, what as you're learning about these varietals, and my favorite varietal, of course, champagne,
Mhm.
what is the biggest myth about champagne? I have one in my mind that I think you've told me that was kind of shocking to me, but I'm not going to reveal that
Mhm.
unless we have time or you really want me to say it. But I'm very curious to hear, like, what is the biggest champagne myth in your mind?
Well, I I'll go with um, there, there's two, but I'll start with the one that's less geeky, and that is, you know, the popular misconception is champagne is just for special occasions, celebrating something, big moments, whatever it is. But the reality is that's just marketing, right? Um, you can find, to me, the joke I've used on you and I've used everywhere. The proper time to drink champagne is any day that ends in Y, because
I
there's
love that.
flexibility. Um, it, it's, it's just, to me, it's happiness in a bottle. So after a hard day, if you want something to brighten yourself up, it's a great way to go. If it's a special occasion, there's special bottles for that. But you can get approachable, um, less expensive champagne that isn't super expensive. And I know expensive is a relative term. Um, the other thing, and this is more a wine geek um, thing, and not every sparkling wine is a champagne. And I'll stop there.
I think that would be the jump off point for a conversation with Thomas as well. Yes,
Yeah,
yes, it's not. Should I share with you the one I thought you were going to share?
sure.
That it had to do with champagne and chocolate.
um, I will take that one step further, and it's just in general wine and chocolate. If people enjoy it, that's fine. But if you, this is where some of that geekiness comes out in that you go into the composition of champagne in chocolate, especially milk chocolate. There's the high sugar content in milk chocolate actually works it as an assault on most wines because there is very low sugar. And so the acidity and from wines or especially with champagne will make the chocolate taste bitter. And so there are some styles of champagne, which we call sec and demi-sec, which are on the sweet end, which would work well with chocolate. But most champagne that people have is very low in sugar. And so um, you tr- it just it can't it complex.
I love it. Word choices, assault. It's an assault.
Yeah, I try.
I've never thought about chocolate as an assault, but now you've given me something else to think about for sure. I love it.
It's finding the right pairing.
You're right, and I didn't understand that from before, so the sweeter wines will lend themselves or varietals will lend themselves to sort of that chocolate marketing moment that I think we can
Yeah.
appreciate as marketers. Now, what is that sound in the glass in layman's terms? Like, what are we hearing when we, not only when we smell like a champagne, for example, for this
Mhm.
conversation, I guess more of a champagne, but then what are we hearing in that sort of effervescence that we might not have known?
So I think that I mean, the marketing speak is that it's the joy of and happiness coming out of the bottle that you're consuming or sharing. But the geeky side of it and the explanation is it comes from the production. So you're hearing the production and aging process that champagne goes through to to provide that sensory experience. And I think that's one of the things that as you start to appreciate wine more, it's not just about flavor. It's about the visual. It's about the sound, especially with champagne, and it's also about the aromas. So, you know, there's even a textural component. And so wine and champagne especially engages almost all of your senses if you are, if you let it. And so those bubbles and the sound that you're hearing is, as I was saying, is the result of what we call secondary fermentation. So when champagne is made, it goes through two uh, two production processes, which is what makes it one of the most expensive things in the wine world to produce. So it's made into a normal wine, then has sugar and yeast added to it and has a crown cap or a bottle cap put onto the bottle, and then it lets it ferment in there. And fermentation, just like any chemical reaction, has byproducts. And one of those, the magical byproducts from fermentation is carbon dioxide. And so normally the carbon dioxide gets released, but with that crown cap, which makes a perfect seal, it dissolves into the wine. And so that's the first step of making the bubbles in champagne. The next is you let it sit and develop flavors. And so when you finally get it, in champagne, the minimum aging time for what we call a multi-vintage or non-vintage champagne is 3 years. You go to a vintage wine, it can be up to 7, sometimes 10, depending on the champagne producer. And so all of this adds to the cost. But when you open the bottle and you pour the wine into a glass, you're hearing the carbon dioxide, you're hearing that fizz and effervescence, the little bubbles that are popping, that carbon dioxide finally being released from solution. And it gives that visual, audio, and the almost the full sensory experience because you can smell what's going on, you see what's going on, you hear it, you taste it. It's it's one of the few wines that gives you all that sensory experience.
That must be why I love it. It's a full immersion.
Yeah,
Full
exactly.
immersion beverage. Um, and, for, a quick maybe tip or recommendation for novices, you know, big houses, small houses, producers of wine, how do if somebody's not fortunate enough to have a wine ninja on their Rolodex, how do you navigate that? And, what should you look for, I guess is the question.
Well, I'm going to take kind of multiple avenues to answer this. I think one is, you know, when you go into a store, it, pref- I almost always recommend trying to go to smaller specialty wine stores because they will have people there that can answer questions and provide guidance. The important thing is when you talk to them, don't tell them whether you like dry or sweet or fruity. Tell them the wine that you enjoy. So if you have had Veuve Clicquot before and you say, I want something like Veuve Clicquot, but you know, not as mainstream, then that person knows exactly where to take you. Um, because you know, my definition of dry, your definition of dry, it's it's not exactly the same. And so just like we taste different things, we have different likes and dislikes, you know, setting an example or giving an example of what you do like helps somebody figure that out for you. Now, if you do go to bigger stores, you got to experiment a little bit. If you know the label, you've heard it in movies or seen advertising for it, they're spending a lot of money on marketing, and I'm not going to say they don't put as much care into it, but they're they're a larger organization. They're trying to make sure they can sell a volume. So this is where the concept of what I call grower producers or cooperatives come into it, and they're smaller labels that have and they're usually great values and provide this alternative to the main labels. Most important thing though, and this goes back to one of the comments I made before, is if you want champagne, it has to be from France and it has to have the word champagne on it because it is a protected region and a protected name.
It is fascinating that it was really a happy accident that brought us to this conversation today. In my mind, a wonderful
Yeah.
happy accident, called champagne, and, which is incredibly intentional from here on out. But, with that, John, I just wanna say thank you so much for joining and for sharing your knowledge and expertise with me and with this audience, because it's something I find that I can almost always talk to you about, and that brings me great joy even when I'm not sipping on a glass of champagne. So thank you for that.
My pleasure, Gina. And um, champagne is one of my favorite topics, and I'm always happy to talk about it. The next time, though, we should do this with champagne together, and that'll make it even more fun.
I think I'm saying yes to that immediately.
Well, let's schedule part two.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Thank you, John. We'll talk soon.
Thank you, Gina.